Welcome everybody to the weekly upstream quadrant community call. Today is Tuesday, October 29, and we are moving towards quadrant 1.0. And the first topic on the agenda is an update from Guy. And off you go, Guy.
Thanks. So yeah, quick update on state of the board reconciliation and default of right. So I'm going to just come very quickly through this list here, right? So a couple of things that are done. And by the way, if you want to get the full picture, you can refer to the mural board that we shared here a couple of weeks ago, right? I can also share the link here on the talk. But basically, the things that are done or work in progress or in review, they all relate one-to-one, more or less, to the tasks that we have all detailed in the planning, the mural board, right? So done. We have the reconciliation of the topology config map that we use also for configuring the OpenShift console plugin. We have Alterino, limitador, meaning the internal components associated with a Kuadrant instance. We have TLS policy and DNS policy done, and we have the rate limit policy done. And by done, I mean this whole thing has been merged, right? There's still some work to be done regarding documentation, run new user guides, this kind of stuff. But coding-wise, it's all done, all merged, right? Ready for review. The same thing we did for rate limiting, we also did for alt. PR is ready, and I plan to demo in this call still. What else? Work in progress. Currently, we have Kevin working on the so-called policy discoverability, aka the policy affected the status condition set in the target resources, right? We similarly to what we're doing throughout this whole refactoring, I'm going to quote unquote refactoring. We also decommissioning an existing controller to replace it with a set of tasks in the state of the board workflow. After that, I was just finishing writing this down. Multiple policies, multiple DNS policies, and TLS policies. Targeting the same resource. So this is I'm calling it a bug, but at the same time with a question mark, right? Because it's not necessarily a bug. It depends on how what we decide to support here. But with the work we did for those kinds of policies, and similarly to alt and rate limiting, in fact, I called that out last time when I demoed the rate limit part. We now support multiple policies of a kind targeting the same resource, right? There's a whole debate about whether we should support that or we should not support that, right? I personally happen to believe that we should support it, and I have my reasons. We can get into details here if we have the time for it, right? But if we decide not to support it, or until we get people convinced that it's a good idea supporting that, right? We need to act on, at least for DNS and TLS, where that strikes us the most, the issue strikes us the most, on fixing that by adding another validation to those kinds of policies to basically disallow users creating multiple resources of those kinds, targeting the same gateway, right? That's what I used to do before. If we want to continue with the same behavior, then we need to introduce a new check in the validation tasks of those resources to get that done. It's a minor thing, but we did not create the issue for it yet. It was just raised this morning by Mike. Thanks, Mike, for spotting that in the DNS policy, to which I encouraged himself, but whoever was involved, in this work, to implement it as a fix. However, we believe has to be done. Later on, if I have the time, I will try to send a draft pull request with a different proposal where I want, to defend the idea, to advocate for the idea of letting multiple policies of those kinds to also be targeting the same network resource. But anyway, that's one thing that we still need to be done, added last minute. Then we are progressing well with the work on cell. Alex can give the details, but expect, a new iteration on those same reconcilers that we already merged and the ones that we are about to merge after the work on cell lands in all those components, right? Autorino, I think was Seamus already done, and also the quadrant operator. So yeah, we basically will reconcile cell predicates and ways to select values in cell from our policies, rate limiting and all, transposing that straight to the WASP configuration. So that work needs to be done. Currently, we are writing the WASP config based on the old structure of the config for those kind of things, right? Where we have, like for predicates, sets of fields, right, in YAML, selector, operator, value. And we're going to get all that replaced with cell expressions. Yeah, go, Alex.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's two levels here, right? So the cell stuff for the route rule condition stuff, that can be done today, right? Because that
Agreed.
has no
Because
impact.
it's landed in the WASP config, yes.
Yeah, so that's all there, so that can be done. I don't know what this, that's more question. You say fixed lack of support to query. I'm not really sure what you mean, but do you mean the support for query
params? Yes,
params?
sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I stopped halfway, sorry.
So that's work that probably, well, there's an issue there. Like if somebody wants to help me, more than thankful that if somebody takes it, is probably a few hours of coding, because it's literally just sprinkling some magic so that we can have nice query param handling there. Yeah, so that is that, right? The rest that Guy mentioned will just be carrying the things over in the quadrant operator, i.e. whatever predicates or expressions are expressed in the policies is to pass them along to the WASM shim for it to evaluate. But for the route rule condition stuff, as we call them, I think, that's all, that can be all done today, other than for the, well, actually it can be done for the query params as well, but probably with a whole lot of cursing.
Agreed. Yeah, and what I wanted to convey here is that we have this issue, right, to work next, and that issue will have an impact on limitations or bugs that we know to exist today, right? So the two things that Alex mentioned, they relate respectively to the 2 bullet points that I was highlighting before, right? So at the level of the API, cell stuff to be done, right? And that will help us fix a current limitation that we have specifically for auth compared to what we had in tech preview, right? In tech preview, a user could write an auth policy and define user-defined conditions, right? Top-level conditions with or operator between the conditions, right? Because those types were bubbling up from the auth config, for the author in the auth config, which allows doing that, right? But right now, because of the new format of the WASM configuration, we no longer support that. Meaning that if the user does that in the auth policy, it would break until we get cell in. Once we get cell in, that's going to be fixed again, right? And back to supporting all those use cases. And as for the other one, that's only internal. That is the one that Alex said the work could be done today. And he's right? That's basically rewriting the same predicates and data selection thing that we do, that we put in the WASP configs, right, in cell, right? And that will help fix one limitation we have today. And in fact, we had this limitation since forever, which is supporting from the HP route, this specific kind of matcher based on query string parameters, right? Maybe not everybody here is aware of that, but currently we do not support matching query string parameters in the rate limit policy, right? And we did support for the auth policy, but now with auth brought into the WASP shim, we basically have the same problem with both, right? Auth and rate limiting. In order to fix this, we need 2 things to be done. 1, we need to rewrite those predicates in cell. And number 2, the thing that Alex is just sharing now, there's some work that needs to be done in Rust, in order to be able to support specific ways, to activate specific cell features in the WAS module. So moving on with the list here, another thing we need to do, this is another thing that we kind of lost when we did the refactoring. At some point, this year, I think or maybe it was last year, we realized a problem on updating resources to a desired state, right? Reconciling existing resource to the desired state due to those resources being transformed, mutated on the fly by the API server. Something that usually happens when you have defaults set in the CRD, but also there are other cases that could trigger that, right? Anyway, we spot that issue, we fixed that issue in the easiest way we could find back in the days. Now that we rewrote those reconcilers, we need to tackle that problem again, right? It's a minor one, something that in the morning time, on an afternoon time needs to be fixed, but because there is no issue open for that just yet, I'm mentioning it here right now, right? We need to tackle that one as well. What else? Yeah, there's an issue for this, right? So we also need to tackle the part of some error handling, specifically for errors that are final, errors that we know the nature that triggered the error does not allow to expect a new reconciliation event being waiting in the queue automatically, but rather we need to act on it, right? Such as when we get rate limited by the API server, or when there is a hard server error, right? An internal server error when we try to create a resource or update a resource, right? Currently, we are not retrying those things, right? So we need to handle those errors properly. And I did not want to catch and treat each one of those cases in each one of those individual tasks of the workflow, because I'm betting more on a more holistic way of tackling those problems, right, at a higher level. I can get you into details with whoever is interested on picking this issue at some point. Then two things that maybe it was only in my head, but I was still thinking that we wanted for text name to land for DNS and TLS policy. Now I'm not entirely sure, right? I know that at some point that it was labeled as nice to have, not as must have, right? So if we really want to get this done, so it's currently not supported, right? And I think that also relates to this first bullet point here that I mentioned before, right? Depending on the decision we have here, there might be more than one way to tackle this problem further down here. Okay, so
Mike,
yeah,
I was chatting to Mike this morning, and he's already looking at the target ref section name for DNS policy, at least.
Okay,
and also that bug.
yes.
I think we were just wanted to figure out what solution we wanted.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. In fact, Mike and I we were chatting about that a few hours ago, and I would propose something different. I want to propose for us not to decide on which solution we want, but actually, I think that Mike already has something half baked. I encourage him to just go ahead and keep on going, however that tackles the problem, right? I happen to have a different opinion on how we should approach that, but we should not spend time on discussing how we do that, right? If I find the time, I think the best way I can propose a different way to tackle the problem is by sending a pull request myself, even if that involves refactoring once again what has just been done by Mike or by Kevin, because Kevin also working on similar stuff for TLS, right? But I think that's okay, that's acceptable. We're not talking about like 2 weeks of work, right? So if Mike has something advanced, go ahead, right? The way I want to propose tackling this, if I find the time for it, is by also letting users writing multiple resources of a kind target in the same policy, right? But that will open up probably in the next week a specific topic in the agenda only for us to discuss that.
Okay. Yep. I just wanted to call out Mike was already.
Yeah. Cool, thanks. What else? Yeah, I wanted, this is more nice to have than a must have, right? because we currently we're currently supporting the same things we supported before regarding this bullet point that I'm highlighting on the screen. The enforced status condition on especially the data plane policies, autumn rate limiting, right? Where we say it's almost it's very high level. We say if that policy, we report if that policy is being enforced or partially enforced, right? But there aren't too much detail about how it's being partially enforced or not enforced at all, right? We only say, oh, it's being overridden, right? Or overridden by these policies, but we don't get to details of each individual rule within that policy is being overridden, and for each path, topological path is being overridden, right? I wanted to get to that level of detail, right? So if I find the time, I will also propose an enhancement, on top of the current implementation of the state of the war to get that done. Otherwise, don't worry, we're going to have the same level of information we currently provide users in those kinds of policies. This is only a curiosity. I've been working on some code cleanup after all the state of the world work, and without all those things that I mentioned before, right? Without the policy discoverability pull request that will also help us deactivate a lot of code. I had already reached over 5,000 lines of code that can be completely removed from the code. I'm talking code that is currently not accessible at all, right? But it's just left behind, right? So things that we can drop. So expect a pull request anytime next week, of me just removing old stuff. What else? We need to also work on improve the integration tests, right? I'm saying enrich the integration test. That's an euphemism, right? Currently, we have no integration tests at all for the merge strategy, and that's my fault, right? I've been working as fast as I can by only fixing the existing ones, making sure it passed for the atomic case, but we do not have new tests for the merge strategy. So we definitely need somebody working on that, right? If I find the time, I'll do it myself. Otherwise, please, more than invited to help. And last bullet point here. Oh, yes, this is an important one, right? So this is a problem we only have now because of the merge strategy and only in auth, right? There's an issue open for this. I'll make sure to add the link here later on. But I'll try to explain very quickly. Before, because we would create one auth config for each auth policy, and because we would create that auth config in the same namespace as the auth policy itself, right? Whatever reference to other Kubernetes resource that a user could put in an auth policy and therefore would also show up in the auth config could all happen within the same namespace. That was not a problem, right? Especially reference to secrets. That is, I think, if I can even remember of any other case, right? I think all the cases that I can remember of are reference to secrets. For example, when you define in an auth policy a step to make a request to an external source of metadata, and that service requires authenticating with OAuth, right? The OAuth client secret needs to be stored in a Kubernetes secret. So in the auth policy, you actually add a reference to that secret object, right? Because now with the merge strategy, we are no longer creating one auth config per auth policy. It's actually more an end-to-end kind of relationship. And we have to create those auth configs all in one single centralized namespace, right? Hopefully you'll show that in the demo. We can no longer trust on those references to work. So step number one of fixing that issue, just put it on the user, right? And say, now if you need in an auth policy to make reference to other objects, keep in mind that that object needs to exist not in the same namespace as the policy itself, but in the same namespace as the auth config will be created, meaning a given namespace X that it's going to be probably the Kuadrant system namespace. And so if you have a secret, you need to create that secret there. not in the namespace of the alt policy. Not ideal, I know. Ideally, we would handle that for the user, right? And then we have more than one way to handle that for the user, right? I'm going to suggest not to do that for view one. And we put some more thought on those options we have, right? Because none of them are really good options, right? They either involve like copying the secret that a user created in one namespace into another, or some more complicated stuff of creating an RBAC for cross namespace references, right? With more changes to the API. I don't think that's the kind of thing we can do for view one at this point, right? The issue has been open like since a couple months now in the Quadrant operator, but it's a hard problem.
I was going to ask if there's an issue. I guess there isn't.
Yeah, there is an issue. I'll make sure to add the link after that. Sorry, that was super quick, right? I'm basically leveraging the fact that we only have one item in the agenda, right?
Yes, Guy, thank you. So basically the message is there's quite some stuff to be done, and anybody who has some time like open, please jump in. And then maybe, and a question would be from me, like it seems they are not really in order. This list is not an ordered list, right? Because I would say everything that says enhance, that could be more to the bottom, and everything that says write integration test or something more like should be probably more at the top.
Well, you tell me. I think it's sort of in order, right? Maybe we can discuss, a few of them,
anyway.
right? But they are more or less ordered
Okay.
by priority, in my opinion.
Okay, cool. Hey, I was thinking for the demos, how about we do the Max's demo first, so we don't hear you all the time?
Sure. Yes, please. Go ahead.
You ready, Maxim?
That is unexpected. Sure, I'll take over.
I know. I'm throwing you under the bus. If you tell me no, then I'll just throw Guy back under the bus. He loves that.
I'm ready. It will be a lovely demo of my terminal window. Okay, so let me quickly set it up. So just as a disclaimer, this demo will be from the dev branch of the DNS operator, not even the Quadrant operator. And what I will be show. So I'll first show to you why all those windows are here and why they're important. So when we get the when we create DNS policy, when we target the gateway with the DNS policy, we can specify the health check spec in that policy, and this health check spec will be transferred directly to the DNS record, and we create one DNS record per listener on the gateway. So the health check from the policy will be transferred on the DNS record. And for the DNS record itself, it will have the endpoints that are defined by the gateway that it wants to publish. And in the status, it will have endpoints that it did publish to the provider. And here in these windows, so the first one would be the an A record specifically from the spec. This would be the A record from the status once it will be published. Here we could see the status conditions of the DNS record that will be translated to the policy. And on the right, you see the results of the health check. So for each of those IP addresses, I'm setting the mock response that this IP address will receive. So the way it will work with uncluster health checks for the DNS record, we would be creating one prop for each IP address. And they would be, according to the config down below, they will be probing the IP address and getting certain responses. And the general behavior that you would expect is when we create a DNS record, until we receive a healthy, so if we have the health checks spec defined, until we receive at least one healthy response from our probes, we will never publish any records. So that's one of the functionalities that we have at the moment. And now I will, there you go. Now I made all the responses healthy. And what we should expect is this status switching from not healthy to I'm okay. Now the DNS record should be happy, and it did publish to the provider the endpoints that it had. And as you can see, everything is successful. Everything is fine. The next, what could happen to the health checks is if one of the addresses on the DNS record starts to fail. So in this case, the second one. And what we would expect is to see the status condition updated accordingly, saying that, hey, this specific IP address on the DNS record is not healthy right now, although the record remains ready true. And that IP address is removed from the A record that is being published. And not throughout the whole demo, the spec endpoints are not modified. So we're affecting only the endpoints that are being published from the DNS record to the provider. So that's all fine. But what happens if both of the IP addresses become unhealthy? If we keep removing IP addresses, we're risking to create an X domain response for the host name. So when in the situation when we see that removal or cleanups of the IP addresses or endpoints from the provider will result in empty endpoints published to the provider from this DNS record, we are, oh, come on, controller, I believe you can do it. So we will mark it as ready false. We will say that health checks are failed. We will list exactly what IP addresses are failing, and we will not remove them from the status. So they would still be in the DNS provider. There would be unhealthy, unreachable, but we would remain. It's better to have the bad response rather than an X domain response. So there you can see it's not healthy. It says the health checks failed and the health check succeeded, and this would be translated to the DNS policy. So those sort of conditions, specifically the ready one, would be translated to the DNS policy, and it would be displayed to the user. And the final, what I wanted to show for today is when we come on, there we go. When we get rid of the health check spec from the policy, we would update the DNS record with health check spec not being ready there. And as you can see, we just got rid of all the health checks are not defined. So we back to the old ways of doing things. And right now, we are not considering Google Meet. Here we go. Right now, we're not considering endpoints that are published by other controllers on other clusters, but this is upcoming work that is about to be done. So that's the end of the demo. I tried to keep it as high level as possible, and for more details, please ask questions.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks. I have a question. Is there an idea of maybe in the future having some sort of a, I don't know, in the policy you could specify a place where to go to or where to direct that domain to if everything fails? Would that be nice, or would that not make sense? Like, so if the last one also fails, that I can in my policy say, look, if everything fails, go here.
It could be an option. Right now, we're focusing on making sure that controllers don't fight with each other in context of multiple controllers working towards the same root host.
The usual behavior in that situation, Thomas, would be that you publish all the records and just let them get a 503 or whatever response is actually coming back.
Yeah, but is that what you would want for an end user?
Well, I guess it's better than getting like your domain doesn't exist and is unresolved.
No, I agree with that. For sure. Yes.
I think maybe what you're talking about is like a custom error page almost,
it's
right?
more like a redirect also, and then pointing in DNS to it. You're right. You were saying, Guy?
I know I was about to ask, how you would imagine that done, if it was at DNS level. I'm guessing you're thinking on a different host name, obviously, than the ones and managed by the policy. Anyway, but yeah, I think Craig covered it a little bit already.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, thank you again. And back to Guy with an old policy demo.
Sure. Thanks. So sorry for all of you that have to listen to me, so share
Maybe you
my,
can practice some accents and then you can do it with the different voices.
all right, mate. Let me try this one. Can you see my screen?
What accent was that, Guy? Just
I don't know.
in your head. What
The
was it?
first one that came to mind. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen, right? I can see your faces, right? So
Yes, yes, we can.
we can see
thank
it.
you. All right. So this is as I said before, right? This is a quick demo of pretty much the same things we did for the rate limit policies a couple of weeks ago. Now with the auth policy, right? So the same kind of feature regarding diffusion of rights and the dropping of route selectors, this kind of stuff that you already saw in the rate limit policy. Now it will also be available in the auth policy. This is based on a pull request that is currently open for review, right? So it's not been merged yet, even though it's ready for review, right? So we're very close, to get this in May. I'm calling this data plane policies because what I have here on the screen for the demo is pretty much the same I have in the verification step for the pull request. It's literally the same. And that includes not only creating auth policies, but also rate limit policies. Because if you're attending these calls, by this time you know that one of the things that we did was bringing auth to the WAS module, right? Meaning that we no longer rely on Istio or Envoy gateway resources to get the auth service configured into the proxy. Rather, what we do is we let our WAS shim or WAS module handle the request to those services and to the auth service as well. So it's interesting to see that working along with the rate limit policy as well, because effectively the kind of WASM configuration we now create mixes both auth and rate limiting, right? So highlights here. Again, as I said before, we have all the diffusion overrides merge strategies supported for auth as well. So atomic defaults, atomic overrides, merge defaults, and merge overrides, right? Basically, all the things that are specified in this RFC here. If you remember from V1 Beta 2 of this API and the concept of route selectors, expected to see it no longer, right? In V1 Beta 3 that got dropped. And instead, now we have the section name field in the target ref, meaning that you can target a section of a resource, whether a gateway or an HP route, by specifying a section name, right? So for example, if you, in an auth policy, just like in a rate limit policy, you want to target only a specific listener of a gateway, you can add a section name and the listener name here. Whereas if you want to target only a specific HP route rule of an HP route, then you can add the section name here and you put the name of the route here. By the way, name of the route is before Gateway API 1.2, right? Due to reasons, we do not fully support Gateway API 1.2 just yet, right? So we do not have the name field in the HP route rule type yet. With Gateway API 1.1, rather, the way you refer to the HP route rule by name is by following this convention that the rules are named after the position they show up in the list, right? In the HP route. So by following this convention, you can already target a specific HP route rule by specifying the section name and using here a route dash and the position of the row in the list. We are similarly to what happened to rate limiting. We also now support multiple policies of this kind of targeting the same resource. We work out defaults and overrides regardless of the kind, meaning we not only get defaults and overrides for policies targeting gateway, but you can also, if it makes sense for your use case, you can also write defaults and overrides in policies targeting HP routes. No more limitation on the multiple network resources with identical host names. This is a documented limitation of Quadrant Tech Review, right? So we are finally getting rid of this limitation. I already mentioned auth requests in the WAS module. A tiny thing, but this pull request also renames at the level of the auth policy the custom response type called dynamic metadata to filters, right? And by the way, if you do not think this would be a good name, and please make sure to comment that on the pull request before it gets merged, right? Because this is user facing and changing the API. And similarly to how it happened to rate limiting again, we also support multiple gateway providers running side by side in the same cluster, both Istio and Envoy gateway. And regardless, we can trust that all the internal resources will be configured accordingly. So I already spin up the environment here. Let me see what I have here, because I probably have, oops, not this one. This one. Yeah, so I have the Kubernetes cluster running locally, where I already deployed also Envoy Gateway. So we have Istio and Envoy Gateway running side by side. This is the current version of the topology. So these are all the resources that the Quadrant operator knows. And now I'm going to create a couple more. I'm going to create an Envoy Gateway class, and I'm going to create a gateway based on that Envoy Gateway class, right? Which brings the topology to this that is here on the screen right now. Only for the sake of it, only to show that we didn't break anything. So I'm going to create a TLS policy here, attach it to this gateway here, to the Envoy gateway. And as you can see in the topology, right, that got all the internal resources created. Well, I created the cluster issuer, but the Quadrant operator created the certificate. Thanks to Kevin. I'm going to deploy an application. So a couple of HP routes and the application itself, deployment and service. So got all those resources created, and they will be reflected here in the topology in a second. Yeah. So we see that because we have one HP route that is parented by both gateways, we see this represented in the topology. We're going to use this for the auth policy we're going to create. And we have a kind of a control HP route that we create here. Also attach it to the Istio gateway, but to the Istio gateway only. What else? Yeah, the toy store HP route defines two HP route rules, rule 1 and rule 2. You can see them here in the topology as well, right? Let's deploy Quadrant. So create a Quadrant custom resource that will get the Authorino and limited door services also deployed to this cluster. You can already see them, the corresponding custom resources represented in the topology. And by the way, it's going to get harder and harder to see the resource on the screen, right? So if that happens, we can just ignore the topology and focus more on the use case on the top, right? Instead of creating this rating policy, we can come back to this later on, but I'm going to scroll all the way to the auth policy, which is the focus of this demo here, right? So I'm going to create an auth policy, attach it to the HP route called Toy Store. So this one here, right? So this HP route is going to get an auth policy attached to it that defines an authentication rule called API keys authentication, which, as you would expect, enforces API key authentication for all the requests passing through this HP route, right? So if we create this HP route, this auth policy, we're going to see the auth policy first attached to the root, and then the topology changes drastically because the Quadrant operator creates all the internal resources to get this auth policy enforced, right? Meaning, because it attaches to this root here, and this root is parented by two gateways, we need to configure both gateways, right? The Envoy gateway provided gateway and the Istio provided gateway. For the Envoy gateway, that means creating an Envoy extension policy where we put our WASM configuration and an Envoy patch policy where we configure the cluster for the proxy to make calls to the Authorino service. And the analogous for Istio, right? For Istio, we have the WASM plugin and we have the Envoy filter, right? One thing that you see in a minute is that the WASM plugin, as well as the extension policy, is shared for auth and rate limiting, while the patch policy and the envoy filter, we have one for each, right? One for rate limiting and one for auth. And we also see auth configs created here, right? So this is also something new compared to Kuadrant in Tech Preview, right? While before we would create one auth config per auth policy, now we create one auth config for each so-called effective policy, or for each different topological path from the gateway classes to the HP route rules, right? And this is kind of a clever way that we have, to quite easily separate, those routes inside of the WASP configuration and get the proper set of rules activated in the auth config. Right now, each one of these 4 auth configs, they look exactly the same. They basically just borrowed the auth rules from this auth policy here, right? But things will change a little bit when we create the next auth policy, right? And if we do this, I consider this demo already a success, right? We can also show something with rate limiting, but this is the main part of the demo here. If we create this second auth policy, targeting the gateway, right, as an override. So basically what we're saying is we want to override any conflicting rule at the lower levels in the hierarchy from this gateway and downwards, right, by making sure we have always an authorization rule called forbidden IP that verifies, by pattern matching, if this source address matches this particular IP, right? It should not be equal to this particular IP. And we're also going to show up here, the new merge strategy, meaning we do not want to override the entire policy that may be enforced at the lower level. Rather, we want to get only this one policy rule injected into those policies, right? So we're going to merge this specification into the lower levels, right? So if we do this, we get it created. It should show up here somewhere, targeting the gateway. So we're targeting the envoy gateway. Again, it's a lot to see on the topology, right? But what you might expect is for all the traffic passing through this gateway, and because the only route attached to this gateway is the toy store route, right? We're going to have a combination of both policies at play. Right? So the auth configs that are to be enforced for all the traffic passing through this gateway in this rule will have rules from the gateway policy as well as the rules from the route policy. Whereas the traffic that flows to the other gateway, where we do not have any gateway rule, any rule enforced at the gateway, we may expect only the rules defined in the policy, right? And the best way to show this is by hiding the topology and showing instead the internal resources. Right? Sorry, not this one. This one we can hide. And let's see if I can enlarge this one. Yes. So in my terminal, if I list the auth configs, we have the same 4 auth configs here, but the spec will change, right? I'm going to scan very quickly to the part that matters for you, right? So this is one auth config. This auth config, if you see here, it contains 2 auth rules. It contains the auth rule that it inherited from the root, right, for authentication, but also the one that came from the gateway. I can tell for sure if we inspect, the envoy extension policy resource that this auth config is being activated for traffic that passes through the envoy gateway, right? This next auth config has a simpler spec. It only contains in the spec the authentication rule. It did not inherit that gateway-defined rule for authorizing on the IP address, right? I know for sure that this is an auth config that's going to be enforced in the WASM module for traffic that flows through the Istio gateway, where we do not have the gateway policy, right? And similarly for the other ones, because we actually have 4 HP route routes, right? If I go to the, let's say the WASM plugins. The WASM plugin, we only have one, right? If you see the action sets here, we have two actions. When we have a post request to any host name, because that HP route did not specify any host name, neither the listeners. We have one single action to activate the alt service with this scope here, which is the name of an alt config, right? If I go back to the alt config, I can tell you that this is an alt config that only contains the authentication rule. And the same here for the GET request, right? Whereas the Envoy Gateway resource extension policies, we also have two actions for each one of the two HP route rules in the path, right? In the Envoy Gateway. When it's a GET, we activate this other alt config, which is an alt config that contains both alt rules, authentication and authorization, and the same here, right? Other than that, we can keep playing on this, right? We can, for example, change here to target a specific section of the gateway, right? Or this other one, targeting only one of the HP route rules, not both HP route rules of the HP route. And that's it, right? If we, let's say, create a rate limit policy here, let me create one, attach it to the root. We do this, and we inspect the Envoy extension policy resource again. You will see here that now for post requests on the Envoy gateway and that HP route rule, we actually have two actions, one for auth and one for rate limiting, because we would be activating now the rate limited. This rate limited was now attached to the route. And this is it. This is what I have for the demo. We have actually a list of over 20 different use cases in the pull request that you can try, right? Including all the combinations of the things that I mentioned before. Section names, multiple resources of a kind, targeting this or that path, and so on. Hopefully we had questions.
Excuse. We don't have much time left. Questions? I have one. Oh man, I had to write it down. Right. I remember, like it's a detail. The TLS policy had an arrow pointing to the policy. That's correct? Oh, sorry, it was not. Sorry. That was not the policy. It was the certificate.
The certificate has an arrow pointing to the listener.
No, to the certificate it went.
Let me see. So it should have, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm no longer sharing my screen, right? But the certificate has an arrow from the listener, meaning it's owned by the listener. So because we create one certificate per listener, right? I mean, that was a decision. If we had like 3 listeners, we would have 3 certificates. Each listener would be linked to their corresponding certificate as a way, to show this ownership relationship that exists between the resources. Listener happens not to be a proper Kubernetes custom resource, right? Rather, it's a section of a Kubernetes resource, which is the gateway. If it was a proper Kubernetes resource, and by the way, there's discussion in the Gateway API right now to do that, exactly what I said. If it was a proper Kubernetes custom resource, we could even have that as an ownership kind of relationship, meaning the owner reference thing. If you delete the listener, it would automatically delete the corresponding certificate resource. We have that kind of thing for other kinds of resources, by the way.
Another thing I was thinking when like basically when you start saying like, yeah, okay, yeah, now the map becomes really big, really large and kind of not usable. Like, how can we make that better? Like how can we keep it being usable?
Yeah, we kind of already did, right? I mean, as I think I mentioned before,
yes.
It's really hard to say what slice of that diagram to focus on, right? So I guess that each user will refer to the diagram looking for something different, right? For the work we did on the OpenShift console plugin, right? We made a call on focusing on the most important resources. I don't think we show any of the internal resources there, right? Only policies, targetable resources, and I think that's it. I think that's good enough, in my opinion. But I can also see, other use cases like for debugging where you show more. Maybe combined with some kind of context selector where you say, I'm interested in debugging all, for example, right? And you can filter out all the things that are not related to all. But there are all sorts of things that you can do.
Yep.
So far, we only have one. That's why it's that big.
Right. Yes. Okay. Any questions from anybody else? If not, anything anybody else wants to say, which they deem important for other people to know about the past, about the future? No? Okay. Very silent today, everybody. Okay, well then I guess it's back to being busy. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week. Take care.